the system that we've developed. The intentions behind this, I don't know if we were totally conscious of all this when we decided to go no dig, but when we kind of evaluate that, this is really what we're doing it for. We're trying to build soil, and we're trying to build soil fertility, we're trying to build soil carbon and sequester carbon. We're trying to reach greater labour efficiency, or I think that should probably say like labour density. We want the work that's going into a farm to be meaningful for everybody, and also bringing us a good return on our time. So also like time efficiency. I've worked on a farm on and off for years. I've hand weeded an acre of onions, and I don't think it's time efficient. It's like when I decided to come back and be involved in the farm management, I knew I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I was going to design a system that didn't need that. So space efficiency, like I don't think actually that cropping intensity is inherently degrading to land. I think even like in our polytunnels now, some of our polytunnel spaces, they've had 5 crops already this year. No green manures for a decade. And those soils are by far the healthiest on our farm. The crop quality goes up and up and up. I think partly that is because the crops become the green manures. There's always roots in the ground. There's always a big succession, and the life in that soil is really thriving. So space efficiency, we're trying to intensify through more successions, intercropping, those kind of techniques. And we were trying to lower the weed burden generally to make this whole space more versatile. It's not, I don't have like a war on weeds mentality, I value weeds, but I know that they cause management issues in horticulture, so that's why we manage them to a low level. We're looking for a higher economic output per square metre. Again, trying to like increase people per square metre, and we're trying to maintain diversity and increase diversity in the cropping. We're also going, we also standardised the gardens. That meant that like our planning processes became so much more simple, and you could actually do a lot more planning because you know that what works in one bed is going to work on any bed in the garden. And also record keeping to be able to like really, get these systems tuned. You need records, and like Tolly, I don't know if he's in here, but like the amount of data he has on his farm is just like mind blowing. Like I'd love to have that amount of data, and that's something I'm looking to build. And kind of standardization supports that. So nutrient capture. I don't think that being dependent on like massive inputs of like imported fertility is a good or like resilient food system. So what we're trying to do actually is manage the nutrient flows through the farm to try and capture nutrient through perennial crops, and then use them to grow the veg. And then we go again, integration of perennials for agroforestry and reduction of fossil fuel use. We hardly use the tractors anymore. Next slide please. So the system we've developed uses standardised beds, like I said. We still use tractors. We use them to aid the mulching process and the crop clearing processes. And that'll be a bit clearer later on. But all other jobs are pretty much done with hand tools. So all of our weeding is done with hand tools. A lot of all the planting, transplanting, seeding, that's all done with hand tools. And then to really be able to cycle that, we're looking for effective composting processes. So we're using all our crop residues are composted, and then we're actually using green manures as well, and just mowing the verges and our neighbours' nettles and stuff like that to really try and kind of capture some of that fertility and compost it properly and make it useful. So next slide please. So this is an overview of the system. So we're using these beds are blacked out with tarps and then mulched. We use a woven weed fabric border, and then we use pins in the same place on each side of the block, so that instead of having to mark all our wheelings for the permanent beds in wood chip or have really clear pathways, we can just easily put a string line up. And that, of all the things that we've done, that simple thing has made it probably like one of the most effective and easeful management situations. Just knowing that you can, if you're using tractors, you're never going to be going on the beds, or if you know, just knowing exactly where that space is. So yeah, and yeah, like part of what we do is really management intensive. Like the vegetable patch is very management intensive. You know, like habitat creation is management extensive, if you like. You know, we basically walk away from our hedgerows or anything like that and just let the nettles and brambles grow, and I find that with that comes so much beneficial activity that we don't need to be leaving a lot of flowering plants in our beds. And because our gardens are quite small, you know, we still have, even this year we've had basically no flowering plants, almost, apart from a few intentional ones. You know, we haven't had crops going to flower, we haven't had weeds going to flower very often. And yet we're still seeing actually more beneficial insect activity, if anything. And I think a lot of that just comes through having like messy edges, you know. Anyway, next slide. So to like outline our bed, how we establish our beds. Yeah, we start with green manures, which have been down for about 3 to 4 years. Well, these particular areas had been in green manure for 3 to 4 years. Like, you know, my parents had been getting older and they'd been cropping less and less, and the green manures were going into like longer and longer. Yeah, were longer and longer in rotation, and so these had been down for about 3 or 4 years. And what we did is we did no tillage at all. You know, we were coming straight onto those green manures, and I think that's been really important to actually preserve that structure, that soil structure that was there, created by that green manure. Like, I don't want to destroy that. That's really important. And you know, so we came up with tarps. We blacked that out. We used EnviroMesh, our insect netting, on top of the tarps as like a windbreak, and that's worked quite effectively, because I'm sure if anyone's used tarps before, they're an absolute nightmare to keep down, but the EnviroMesh, as strange as it looks, is very effective at doing that. And so yeah, after that we put down our weed fabric borders, we mark out our beds with pins, and then we're coming on and we're mulching. And the initial mulches are, yeah, we aim for about 10 centimetres of weed-free compost. Like, I don't know where that's going to come from for most people, but for us that's green waste. It's what we have access to. And it's important to say that that's an initial mulch. It's like not what we're aiming to do long term, and it's probably, as Tali mentioned, you know, it's not ideal long term by any means, but what we're actually trying to do there, it's not for fertility. Like, this ground's been in a green manure for 3 years, it's fertile, the soil's quite naturally fertile, you know, these are alluvial soils. What we're trying to do is just create like a weed-free starting point. So we're trying to suppress germination of annual weeds in that ground and make the management easier going forward. That also increases organic matter quite a lot, which I think is, you know, makes things more easeful in the soil. I think, you know, higher organic matter is more forgiving generally. But yeah, you probably wouldn't want to be doing that every year, I don't think. And yeah, anyway, next slide. So then that's basically it. You know, once they're mulched, they're planted out. Just to say, our ground stays under a tarp for, you know, we're usually doing it from around November until around, we might start mulching in March, but then we'll probably put the tarps back on and then just uncover them as we need them. So we try to aim not to be planting into new beds until about May. So they've had a few months in the growing season under the tarps to try and really decrease the vigour of the perennial weeds and kill off all the green manure that was there. So, yeah, but it won't kill perennial weeds. You know, bindweed and couch grass will still be there, as well as some other things, but they will be, you know, weakened quite a lot. And what we then do is we actually, before we mulch, we do go through and just hoe any of that off, so that it's got to totally regrow from all its root reserves. And then what we keep doing throughout the season then is we keep going back like as often as we can manage in those first years to really try and hoe off those grasses and bindweed every year and really just try to exhaust their root reserves. And actually we've seen couch grass for us would go in the first year, and my mum Jane, she's actually here, but I don't think she's in the session. But she'd been battling couch grass for 30 years, and we managed to get rid of it in a year. And so it can be done. But it means you need to get out there and you need to weed regularly, because for those first years, if you let it get established again, if you let it replenish those root reserves, it will take off again, and then you're always going to be on that treadmill. So. Yeah, next slide, I think. Yeah, so then we grow those crops in that. At the moment, there is definite kind of fertility from the herbal base that we're still using, because the green waste is generally quite poor quality, like in terms of nutrient. And then we're clearing the crop residues, and the way we're doing that is we're using this flail mower collector. So one of the things about being able to integrate our tractors with our noded beds is that we can use some slightly heavier machinery for some of the more labour-intensive jobs. And one of them, if you're growing in a noded system and you're having to remove all your crop residues every year, there's a lot of labour there, and that's something that is probably not going to be so soul-nourishing, taking away, barrowing around, crop residues, for hours and hours every day. It's not something we really want to be doing. So we're trying to mechanise that process a bit. We use a flail mower collector. What we're doing actually is mixing some straw in with crop residues when we think they're quite high in nitrogen. We're flail mowing that to kind of macerate it and collect it at the same time. We try to adjust moisture on the beds. If we're using straw as brown matter, we'll try and water it on the bed first, so that once it's flail mowed and collected, we can basically just dump it into a compost heap and go, basically. That's what we're trying to do. And then the compost, we're using a forced air composting system, so we basically just have a bouncy castle blower attached to some PVC pipes in a very kind of Wallace and Gromit style. And then that's just on a timer, and what that does is it just pumps air into our compost piles, every so often to try and keep them aerated, so we don't have to be turning them a lot. And we've had mixed results with that, to be honest. With the crop residues, we're not using that anymore, because we found that when we were kind of putting in drips and drabs of material onto this compost pile, it wasn't really, some places were composting and some places weren't. We didn't manage to get the balance right throughout, because every kind of piece of the pile was a totally different mix of material. So what we're doing now is we're using that system to compost bigger loads of material at once. So when we're gathering green manures or generally mowings, and we're making a mix, and then we're making a big compost pile at once. And then our compost, our crop residues, because we don't have flowering, because we've kept on top of our weeds and we haven't, allowed weeds to go to flower, we don't have a lot of weed seed in that material, so we don't have to worry about getting it too hot. So those crop residues now we're just putting into a slower pile, and that's working fine. Next slide, please. So weed suppression, weed management, for us it comes down to a three-pronged approach, you might say. We try to start with a low weed state, so using mulch to suppress that germination, and trying to remove or kill off perennial weeds, so that you do start with a clean slate, if you know what I mean. And then we're suppressing germination, because they always come back, and so they should. But you know, we're trying to suppress that with mulches, and then we're trying to disturb them regularly. And I think, like, this sounds like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work to keep on top of that. But I think you've got to, there's, like, I could give you, like, if I took loads of, like, records on the time we're putting into weeding, I bet you'd be like, wow, that's a lot of weeding. But I think what's missing in that is, like, the qualitative aspect of that. Like, what's the weeding like? You know, and it's nice weeding. You know, we're walking around leisurely with long-handled hose. You know, we're not down on our hands and knees, like, ripping out big weeds. You know, it's different. You know, it's not always so nice, to be honest. But yeah, next slide, please. So, like, weeding tools, you know, I experiment with a lot of tools. I'm interested in tools. And so, but most of what we use for weeding is, like, very simple. You know, it's oscillating hose. But the perennial stuff, when you've actually got to cut the weeds, you know, when you've got to cut below the growth points, you know, that's when we're using oscillating hose. Those collinear hose are very effective at that. We use wheel hose in the pathways on beds that haven't been planted. Wire weeders shouldn't be in that category, so ignore that. But you know, once we don't have that perennial weed burden, once we're keeping on top of germinating weeds, that's when weeding can become a hell of a lot more efficient. Because you know, a weed that's that big is the same weed as it will be when it's that big, but it's very easy to kill when it's that big. So, like, you know, once we're just dealing with annual weeds, you know, that's when we're using things like wire weeders. This wheel weeder here from TerraTech, you know, that wheel weeder you can run down a bed, and you know it'll disturb any germinating weed, and it's very effective. So once we're on, once we don't have perennial weeds, that weeding can get really quite efficient then, and that's when we're starting to see big reductions in you know, the effort of keeping that low weed state. Next slide, please. So yeah, like, bed preparation is very simple, really. Like, we're just using compost. We're using, like, this year we will hardly need any green waste. We've gone, like, you know, we're using pretty much all our own compost now. And, well, we will if our composting experiments succeed. If they're full of weed seeds, we might not use it. Anyway, yeah, but it's very simple. Like, we're using tractors with a hydraulic link box to move that compost around. You know, again, it's like, you know, that's a very laborious process. We're just trying to make that just a bit easier generally using tractors, and that's pretty much the only activity that the tractors are used for on the beds now. And, like, even the crop clearing, we tend to actually remove the residues by hand and make a kind of windrow and then collect them up afterwards. But yeah, that's very effective. Like a 24 metre by 1 metre bed, with green waste, because it's quite easy to move around, it's not very lumpy. You know, one person, just me by myself, I can pretty much mulch a bed, you know, around 20 minutes, 24 minutes by 1 metre, and you know, I think that's quite efficient. Anyway, yeah, and then we're just working it out, and it's that simple, really. So next slide, please. And then seeding and transplanting. You know, we've experimented with a few different tools, but generally, like, marking out is just a string line. Again, like, we have permanent bed markers, so we can always put a string line out easily. Amenders mark that out with a rake and pegs. We're using a 6-row seeder for all our seeding. We don't, like, direct seed, like, a big range of crops. Most of it's transplanted, so you know, that's quite effective for us. It's not the most, like, accurate, like, transplanter, like the Jang or Pterodonus or whatever it is probably more accurate, but that's extremely quick because it's got, you know, you can do really dense direct seeding very quickly with that, and I really like it. I think it's a beautifully designed tool. We have been using a paper pot transplanter. We're not using it anymore. Something that you'll find out about that you'll never hear anyone, no one that sells that tool, not even the manufacturers, give you this information. It's something we figured out. Those paper chains are not made out of paper. they're made out of microfiber plastics. They don't degrade. You know. Yeah, no one will tell you that. They're developing one. Because I kind of, when I saw that they weren't degrading, I was thinking like, there's something about that. That is not just paper, you know. So, you know, I contacted the manufacturer. I said like, what are these actually made out of? It doesn't seem normal. And you know, in Japanese, Google translated English, he basically said that yeah, they're a petroleum-based synthetic fibre. You know, well, that's not something we're going to do to our, you know, that's not something we want in our soil. So even though it's quite a big investment, we've discontinued it. He also said that they're developing one made out of hemp fibre. So that might be viable, because it is an incredibly well-engineered machine. It is beautiful, you know, using that. It is very effective, and it's very low disturbance. It's not been great for everything, to be honest, but for some things like our lettuce, you know, we do a lot of successions of lettuce in the season. It has been very effective for that. So, you know, the idea of going back to hand transplanting all that is a little bit daunting, but, you know, we'll manage. So, yeah, next slide, please.